Recording in progress.
Well, my official surgeon who's has
Can you stop here?
has been problems with.
How do you assume that?
But he expired.
Hitting the wrong button. They shouldn't trust me with these things. All right, back to sharing the screen. As I mentioned, we've had the staff has been working during the same time that the General Assembly was in session on some issues that are impacting the Opioid Abatement Authority. And Adam Rosatelli sent out a report of what was happening with the state budget and actions from the General Assembly. I've tried to summarize some of those items here on this slide with bullet points. I already mentioned the work that we were able to accomplish with the Auditor of Public Accounts. There's budget language in the budget that's being negotiated that would further clarify the role of the APA in opioid settlement fund local audit process. The governor in his proposed budget created a new carve out, if you will, of the state treasury called the Commonwealth Opioid Abatement Remediation Fund, or CORE, COAR. And basically what this is a lockbox that accepts the opioid settlement funds that come directly to the state of Virginia, and basically puts them in that lockbox and says that they can only be used for opioid abatement purposes. The same requirement that we're giving with VOAA money that goes to cities and counties and state agencies was really the best way that I could describe what was envisioned in the governor's budget. That was a measure that would take effect with that budget. Senator Pillion carried Senate Bill 1414, which would further codify that fund into an ongoing presence in the state budget after the beginning of the fiscal year. And Senator Pillion's bill did pass both houses unanimously, so we're very thankful for that. The governor had proposed funding to go into this core fund. So in other words, this was going to take portions of the opioid settlement funds that had already been received by the Commonwealth and earmark them into the core fund for specific purposes, including a public awareness campaign to reduce fentanyl poisoning, especially among youth, to support costs associated with a statewide fentanyl response strategy, and to purchase and distribute additional Revive kits and doses of naloxone. And so those are not funds that the Opioid Abatement Authority will be administering. They're funds administered by various state agencies, but they would be the location where the funds would reside would be in this Commonwealth Opioid Abatement Remediation Fund. We see this as a real victory, because when we are able to share with the community how opioid abatement remediation funds are being spent, whether they're from the state, whether it's funds that cities and counties have spent, whether it's funds that this board has authorized in the form of grants, that will really be reporting on all of it, and instead of only being able to talk about bits and pieces of the opioid settlement funds. In addition to Senate Bill 1414, our chairman carried Senate Bill 1415, which is really that statewide naloxone response plan, the opioid impact reduction. And this bill, Adam did a nice job summarizing it. It does a lot of things, but notably it takes the training requirement for training people how to administer naloxone and makes it a recommendation rather than a requirement. So it really removes what many people feel like was a barrier to getting naloxone out in the hands of people to meet it. It also creates some opportunities for nonprofits to streamline working with localities if they have a role in the addiction and the opioid space, and it compels state agencies to work together, VDH, DBHDS, and Department of Corrections to work together to develop a statewide opioid response plan, and that plan is due back on September 1st to the chairs of the money committees. In addition, Senator Pillion also worked with Senate Bill 1424, which is a companion bill in the House, authorizes additional people to carry and utilize naloxone. Senator Bell introduced legislation that would it's really more of a name change that changes the Substance Abuse Service Council to the substance abuse to help me out here. I think it's the Addiction Services Council, and it adds one representative from the Opioid Abatement Authority to the member of the council. And then finally, there was another bill that doesn't directly impact the Opioid Abatement Authority. It creates a separate fund called the Virginia Opioid Use Reduction and Jail-Based Substance Treatment and Transition Fund. And essentially, this would be a fund that would allow the Department of Criminal Justice Services to make grants to local and regional jails to provide substance use treatment inmates. I'm not aware of any funding that was proposed in the budget, but the bill did pass that would create the infrastructure for that. Just changing gears a little bit for the board, the status of our grants process. To be perfectly frank with you, we thought that at this meeting you'd be approving grant applications. Things have not moved as quickly as we had anticipated. I will say that the grants committee is, Dr. Melton will be making a report out on their efforts. We, as I mentioned earlier, we did open the application period for cities and counties to apply both for their individual grants as well as for cooperative partnership grants. We opened that process on January 19th. The process closes on May 5th. It appears that there's a lot of activity around Virginia, and cities and counties are definitely, from what they're telling us, they're working on the grant applications. There seems to be a lot of interest in the collaborative or regional application processes. Literally each city or county that we've spoken with is working on these. I think part of the process that is creating a little bit of a longer time frame in submitting these than we expected was that we did ask that the local elected bodies sign a resolution that would basically support these applications. And since boards of supervisors and city councils typically meet twice a month, I think what you're going to see is most cities and counties will take something to their elected body in the second half of April. And so the staff is clearing our calendars to work around the clock during the second half of April and early part of May as we anticipate many of these applications coming in. We don't like to just talk about what we think will happen. And so today we sent out a survey monkey instrument to every city and county administrator in the state and asked them some basic questions about what are their plans in terms of submitting applications. Do they plan to submit a local application? Do they plan to put a regional application? Do they intend to apply for the standard? And would that like any help assistance? And so as we receive information back from that survey, we will certainly share that information with the grants committee and with the full board, because I know we're all eager and excited to see these applications come through. We did receive one application already. The county that submitted it did a really nice job with the application, but in speaking with them, it probably is going to be resubmitted as a regional application rather than as individual county application, which is the way it was submitted. And Sheriff Barron.
Yeah, is the May 5th deadline, is that hard and fast? Or is that something, understanding that it's taken the cities a little time to get their legs under them, to get the grants to us? Is there any talk about potentially pushing that back?
So just in case everybody, make sure the folks online were able to hear, the question was whether or not May 5th is a hard and fast deadline. And I would say that is the plan that was proposed to and adopted by the grants committee. We could revisit that. A little bit reluctant to do that because of the fact that we're opening the grants process up again very soon. It's going to open up again October 1st. I will say that if there's any city or county that's rushing against the clock, they're certainly welcome to contact us. They can submit what they have. I think if we certainly anticipate that there will be applications that we receive on time, but that we will need additional information after May 5th. And so hopefully that provides the wiggle room that a locality may need so that the application comes in on the 4th and we call them up on the 6th and say we still need a few things. I would certainly expect to have that kind of flexibility baked into it. But I don't know that it's fair to the others that it got it in on time if we allow a locality to not submit anything and then turn in an application after the due date. So if I feel like there's a consensus from the board, and what we'll do is see how it goes with these surveys, see what kind of response we get. And if we have concerns, we go back to the grants committee and certainly share that information with the full board. We have not yet released the process publicly for how we would provide grants or financial assistance to state agencies. We have it's within our work plan to present all of that to the grants committee for their final vote and review when they meet on April 8th. We'll certainly be sharing drafts of it with them before then, but the grants committee will be asked to vote on the guidance for those grants on April 8th. We would then anticipate opening up the process for state agencies in the middle of April, April 15th, and then gives state agencies a full 2 months to work on proposals and turn them back in. And then there would be about a 2-month period where the staff and the grants committee would review those applications, potentially negotiate with the state agencies to right size everything so that we can vote on and provide awards to state agencies by the end of August, early September. All of that's outlined in the timeline. It's outlined in the books that we've distributed. Ordinarily, we would offer some time on the agenda of the board meeting for a representative of the Office of the Attorney General to give the board an update on where we are with pending settlements. Tonight, we're doing something a little bit different for 2 reasons. First, the update itself is probably going to take more time than we were comfortable trying to fit into this board meeting and listening session. But probably even more importantly, there's some critical milestones that are coming up very soon. So of the 5 settlements that are pending, which again include Walmart, Walgreens, CVS, Teva, and Allergan, the cities and counties of Virginia have until April 18th to make a final decision as to whether they're going to opt into those settlements and release individual plans. And their response, which is due back to the Attorney General by April 18th, is really critical in figuring out what the next step is with all those settlements and in understanding when those funds would be forthcoming to Virginia. And so what we would like to do is to work with Richard Schweiker from the Office of the Attorney General. We will try to find a time that works for the board members who would like to do this live. And we will do a virtual webinar where Rich will provide the update over a format like this, what we're using here with Zoom. So members of the board can ask questions and hear the information. We will record that webinar and provide it as a recording both to the general public as well as to the other members of the board. And so this would not meet the definition of a public meeting that requires a quorum. So we don't have to do the head counting and the traveling and all of those things, but rather we can provide this for the board members, either for you to dial in and participate in real time or to see it afterwards as a recording. Okay, one of my final items on the report is an update on where we stand with the Virginia Department of Health, VDH, and with the Department of Behavioral Health and Development Services. And so this time last year, the state budget included language that would connect the Opioid Abatement Authority, which at the time, as members of the board will remember, still didn't have any staff, would provide a mechanism whereby VDH would support the board with some startup operational activities, some administrative activities. And so budget language was included that provided VDH with $200,000 in funding and the ability to authorize a couple of full-time positions in order to assist the board to get up and running. And I know I'm very thankful for the help that VDH was able to provide to me in my onboarding process and getting oriented and getting started. They've been handling our payroll, they've been handling our payments to vendors, they've been handling our HR process. And so they've done an amazing job. They did not wind up filling new positions to do that. They added it onto their existing workload. And so I'd like to publicly acknowledge and thank them for the work that they've done. We did feel like moving forward, we're going to continue to need the Opioid Abatement Authority is not going to be a large enough organization to justify having our own HR department. to have our own accounting department, you know, or to have some of these other functions that require a little bit of an economy of scale. So we knew we wanted to create a relationship with an agency that could provide those types of services for us on the back end. And in consultation with Secretary Littell's staff and in consultation with VDH and DBHDS, we decided to pursue a relationship with DBHDS. And so what you will see happening is that the budget that's currently being negotiated will has in it currently, and I think once it passes, you'll see the budget language move the money from VDH to DBHDS. And we, in anticipation of that, we have signed an MOU. We signed it last week that establishes exactly what type of services DBHDS would provide for the authority, which would include many of our financial transactions, access to the state's budget, and auditing infrastructure, human resource management functions, really kind of you know, for example, if we advertise a position, we need somebody that can post it on a website. We need entities that can review the applications for qualifications. They'll do that type of work. They can assist us with putting together our procurement programs and other routine administrative functions that really allows this authority to minimize its expense on full-time staff that works for the opioid abatement authority. And so we see this as a win-win. I'd like to thank the secretary who's here tonight for his assistance in setting that up. And certainly Nelson Smith Commission of DBHDS has been fantastic to work with. And so I'd like to pause here and ask if there's any questions about this relationship with DBHDS before we move on.
Anyone from the board have questions for Tony?
I will note that the reason why we've not filled the accountant position is because we felt like it was prudent to figure out exactly what type of accounting services DBHDS can provide for us and reevaluate what sort of financial and analytical needs we have on the staff. And we may very well be in a position where we look to change the scope of that role. Or it might be that it's appropriate to maintain a senior accountant, but we're not ready to make that final decision yet. Okay, at this point, I'd like to pivot just a little bit and bring your attention to, for the members that are in person, we passed out a 3-ring binder that looks like this. For the members that are joining virtually, the same information was sent to you with your invite for the meeting, and we're going to be mailing you the actual 3-ring binder. Over the course of the holidays, the staff got together to try to take all the ideas that we've been discussing and start to create a framework and an organizational plan to capture all those things and to reduce them a little bit in time. And as I used to always say in the fire department, hope is not a plan. And so we wanted to bring the board an actual plan that dictates or indicates rather what we expect to get accomplished as a staff with the guidance that you provided us, in particular with 4 particular areas, 4 particular goals. The thought is that this is a living document, so it's a plan. The plan is going to change as it needs to based on conditions on the ground. But it is a plan. It's a plan that we intend to follow in our bi-weekly staff meetings. We go through this thing. We're going to be going through this thing and checking each part of it. So it's not one of these strategic type documents that sits on a shelf, but rather one that identifies the opportunities, the necessary timelines and dates for meetings, and resources that may be required to accomplish each of the tactics and strategies that are listed. So these are the 4 goals that are outlined in our operational plan. The first one is to distribute the funds to cities, counties, and state agencies in accordance with the code and in accordance with the board's desires. The second goal is to conduct a comprehensive communications and outreach program to share information about opioid settlements in general and about the opioid abatement authority. The third goal is to develop and launch a technical assistance program to cities and counties. And the final goal is to formalize the OAA's administrative and business office functions. You'll see in your packet that we were able to provide you with a schedule of meetings that goes all the way through the end of this meeting. The one that's on the screen goes through the end of the year. We actually have a good part of next year mapped out as well. And we'll continue to update that information and share it with the board This really allows you to go into your personal and your professional calendars, hopefully, and see what meetings we're proposing, so that we can identify, we can get away from this process of sort of last minute schedule. Which we certainly appreciate the board's flexibility to this point, but we feel like you have a reasonable expectation of knowing what the schedule is going to be well into the future. I don't expect folks to be able to read this slide, but I wanted to give you an idea of the type of summarization that we provided in this document. What you see here are the 4 goals broken down by strategy areas, where we've summarized each of them. We list out the status and time frame. And to give you an example, under goal number 1, which is to distribute the grants to cities, counties, state agencies, we've identified each of the specific sub-processes, including the grant process for individual cities and counties, the process for cooperative partnerships, the process for state agencies, and the associated timeframe that goes with that. We've identified the timeframe and the need to develop the OAA's online portal, so that cities and counties don't have to fill out their applications on paper, but rather they can log in and all the information is provided in a portal, and that would be an opportunity for us to share and receive information from our customers, the cities, counties, and state agencies that we work with, as well as to provide them access to tools, resources, a toolkit, and a platform for sharing their financial and performance data back with the OAA, and ultimately to feed into a dashboard that provides the type of transparency and public information that this board has been talking about. And so there's a time frame identified for doing all of that, as well as for identifying application periods going into next year, as well as things like developing a policy and practice for conducting audits, programmatic and financial audits of the information that we receive back from our recipients. And so that's an example of the level of detail that we've tried to map out for each one of these goals. And I know it's a lot to digest, and hopefully members can peruse this at your leisure. We also wanted to provide you kind of I think it's called a Gantt chart, that sort of gives you a graphical representation of what all of this looks like when you layer these goals on top of each other in real time. So that you can see that at the same time that we're managing certain processes under goal 1, we also have not forgotten about the other goals. And so we have multiple balls in play at all times. This has been, I think, helpful for us to anticipate and budget our time for things like presenting at conferences, offering webinars for cities and counties about the opioid abatement authority, sharing information with the board, and so forth. And really, this is designed to help us keep everything that the board has asked us to do in focus and on according to a schedule that we can share with you and with the public. Before we move on from that, again, I'll pause if there's any concerns, any feedback from the board. There's no action required from the board, but I did want to share with you the work that's been done. Again, all of this is subject to revision. And so if members of the board see anything here that's missing, or you'd like us to add additional information, we would be happy to do that. So, Mr. Chairman, I don't know if there's any comments from the board or any feedback, any thoughts.
Anyone have any comments or questions for Tony?
Great. Hearing none, just to sort of lay lay out the plan for the rest of this meeting. There are a couple of items that the board will be asked to consider or to take up under new business. The first of those is to adopt a personnel policy manual. And since we are onboarding full-time staff now, and we have, because we're an authority and we are exempt from the state's Personnel Act, it's really incumbent upon us and upon the board to adopt a policy so that when we hire staff, that we can share with them what anybody would expect in a government job, which is a set of policies, procedures, their rights and responsibilities. So Kudos to Karen Sand in particular for researching this. She pulled together, we relied heavily on, as a starting point, the personnel policy that was developed by the Virginia Foundation for Healthy Youth. But we also compared it to policies and procedures from various other entities in order to come up with what we thought was the best practice for our team and for our needs. This policy has been reviewed by the staff and the Office of the Attorney General to make sure that it comports with all the appropriate laws regarding employment. And we've got the nod from the attorneys. And so you'll be asked during new business to consider adoption of that policy manual. The second item would be for the board to consider the approval for one additional full-time position. This would be a business system analyst. And this person's primary job will be to help us develop and manage that online portal that I was describing to you, as well as all of the data that's going to be entered into it and shared across other platforms in Commonwealth. We believe that we can keep our staff lean and mean if we can automate a lot of what we do. And I think at the same time, we can provide the best possible customer service and the best possible data back to the citizens and to the leadership of the board and to the leadership of the General Assembly, to the administration, if we have a cutting edge system in place. And so in order to do that, staff is recommending that we fill this full-time position. The all-in cost for this position, if we hire at the top of the range, benefits and salary benefits, taxes, all of that is $140,000. So the ask will be for us to authorize the recruitment and filling of this position not to exceed $140,000 a year. Next, there's going to be 3 items under new business where I'm seeking authority as executive director from the board to negotiate and execute 3 separate agreements, all for professional services. The first would be for event planning. We are already planning to host 2 one-day workshops later this year. One will be in September, the other in October. The dates are in the book. I think it's September 9th and October 15th. The September 9th will be in Abingdon, October 15th will be in Roanoke. And these are best practices workshops for cities and counties. We've heard a definite need from our cities and counties that they're interested in learning more about how to properly design their local abatement programs. There's a lot of education and awareness that I think can be offered and would be most appropriate in meeting this board's goals. And so looking into next year, looking into 2024, we see the need for additional meetings of this type in order to plan these meetings properly and to register people properly, to have them run smoothly, to run efficiently, and to actually promote and market them so that we fill the seats. We're recommending that we enter into a contract with a company that specializes in that type of work. I don't have a bid for you to consider, so I'm asking for authorization not to exceed $35,000, both for this year and for next year, the total amount for the 2 years for the professional services and event planning. The next one is for communications, branding, and marketing. And I really struggled with this one for a while. I didn't want us to have to spend any money on these kind of things, but we've tried every kind of pro bono, charitable type of lead that you can think of. We've asked our friends and neighbors, can anybody help us design a logo or come up with a design for PowerPoints and help us with some of our marketing. And we've come up empty on those types of alternatives. And so we're seeking permission to spend up to $15,000 for the remainder of this year and all of next fiscal year to get a communication, branding, and marketing plan in place. That would result in things like an OAA logo, OAA letterhead, business cards, a consistent look on our website, on our newsletters, on emails that we send out, the signature line on our emails, all of these things as well that we could share with board members and members of the board, like business cards and so forth. And then the final of the 3 professional services contracts for a financial advisor. And so one of the things here in a moment when the finance committee reports out, is that the finance committee has asked staff to engage the services of a financial advisor to look at some long-term fiscal plans, in particular, to look at the subject of securitization and how the board, what kind of options the board may want to entertain with securitizing some or all of the OAA's funds, as well as how could recipients of our grants potentially securitize their funds. And so we are not sure how much this type of financial advisor services will cost. We will do a competitive procurement process, but we're seeking authorization to engage in that process with a contract amount not to exceed $100,000. If that turns out to be inadequate amount of funding, then we would come back to the board for additional authorization. And so when we get to the new agenda, when we get to the new business portion of the agenda, those are items that you hear about, and I didn't want them to be a surprise. Mr. Chairman, brings me to the end of my presentation. So again, if there's any questions that members of the board have, I'd be happy to try to answer those questions at this time.
I'd open it up now to any questions that the board has about what the presentation or about what we're going to be discussing under new business.
Yes, sir, about anything that I've presented.
Just, you know, I know you've given like not to exceed 35,000 up to 15,000. When it comes to communication, branding and marketing, is 15,000, I'm just asking.
We have some
number for that.
Yes, sir. We have some soft quotes. We spent, particularly Kara has spent considerable time looking for a responsible firm that can meet our needs. And we think the initial startup costs of getting a logo and the basic elements of a brand in place will be less than $4,000. And then you're looking at an hourly rate, you know, $120 an hour, something like that, for additional consultations if we need to design something or we have a particular type of communication strategy where we need assistance, then it would be on an hourly basis. But the total amount that we're seeking would not exceed $35,000 for the year.
So Tony, you talked about some.
I'm sorry, 50,000 per year.
50,000.
I'm sorry.
You talked about several different things here as well as a new full-time staff person. So can you at a high level talk about kind of what that means for the FY23 budget and then what that's going to mean as far as implications for the FY24 budget?
Great question about what impact does this have on the budget? And this is kind of where I've asked our Director of Finance, Adam, to be queued up and to speak to that if he would.
Yes, sir. So depending on when the position would be hired and prorated in the current fiscal year that ends June 30th, and then the full year fully encumbered if we're hired at the salary and benefits that Tony quoted, the high end would be $140,000 for everyone.
So maybe my question wasn't clear enough. So basically, and I'm just so I have no idea what it is. So like right now, like there's 5 FTEs that work for the abatement, you know, the opioid abatement authority, and then the terminal budget, sort of personnel and operating is $1.2 million. With this, it'll be 6 FTEs, and then it will rise it up to kind of 1.35 million.
So we can talk about. Well, first of all, I believe that we currently have 6 authorized positions. So you have 4 people currently on board. Cindy is starting in April, and then we have the currently unfilled accountant position. So that brings us to 6, and then Mr. Washington is correct. We'll be adding 1 more FTEs for a total of 7. And so if all the positions were filled, the impact on the budget of the administrative budget we can look at in terms of percentages. So what's a reasonable percentage that the board might want to spend on the administrative side of the budget? And Adam, if you could speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. Thanks, Tony. I don't have the administrative budget in front of me, but generally speaking, personnel as a percentage of the overall administrative budget would be about 50%, which is generally in line with what you would expect in a smaller operation like that. If that makes sense, are you taking the context of the overall cost of FTEs in relation to the overall budget?
So, I guess it's just the overall kind of, we talked about, the number of full-time FTEs and then the overall sort of personnel costs associated with the opioid abatement authority. Kind of, this is another full-time position. So just wanting to just be clear on what this means as far as what the budget was before for personnel costs versus what it's going to be now that we're going to be voting on another full-time position to be added, to this, so that we're just all on the same page on the overall number of staff that will be working for authority now, and the number of folks that we're going to be paying for to provide those services.
Yes, sir. We will circle back with the board on the actual numbers. I can tell you that we've looked at, should the board approve this position, Adam does have the numbers crunched. And we looked at what the salaries would be for all the full-time salaries and benefits as a percentage of the opioid abatement fund on an annual basis. And it's about 5%. And so, you think about organizations that any of us might donate to, whether it's United Way or another charity, you want to know what's the overhead cost. In this case, you're looking at a very low overhead cost. I don't know if that helps to answer your question, but in terms of the amount of funding that will be administered, if you look at the revenue coming in, the grants that this board is going to be providing, is budgeted to send out every year. And then a component of that being our administrative or overhead costs, the salary component is about 5%.
We'd be happy to provide very specific numbers though as well. I mean, it's in my laptop, so I can get it and share it later.
I know how that is. So it's like, okay, I wasn't ready for that one, so I get it. So the other one, on social recovery training. So when you talk about financial, and I don't know this quote, you said security or security costs. What does that mean in layperson's terms?
Oh, sure. So, Adam, you want to take this?
Sure. Yeah, this is going to be part of the finance committee report because it was part of the finance committee.
Well, I'm stealing your thunder for later. My apologies.
Yeah, no, that's fine. So securitization, generally speaking, would be, in the context of this, would be issuing bonds backed by the settlement revenue, some portion thereof, right? And then there are costs and benefits associated with that, depending on the prevailing economic climate, interest rates, and that sort of thing. What you would like to do with the funds, get a lot of funds up front. What do you anticipate doing with those? You can invest some. So it's kind of a complex mix of things, but essentially it's issuing debt with the settlement payments as the revenue backing that debt.
Okay. Thank you.
I just asked Adam if you would grab his laptop so that when we do get new business, hopefully we'll have a specific answer for you on the numbers in the budget. So,
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
As it relates to the full-time position that you're asking for, and just kind of follow up to Washington's question. There is a potential that you may not fill that other position, right? Because you're getting help from the DB. I see. Right, I appreciate that.
That position basically has been approved by the board, but because we're in the middle of making that transition, it didn't seem appropriate to fill it right now. When we have clarity on exactly what we need, then we will come back to the board and get your consent before we fill that position. So even though that is showing as a quote unquote expense in the budget, we're not actually spending those funds right. Mr. Chairman, if there aren't any other questions, we now
Right.
my report's concluded. Thank you.
Thank you, Tony. Very thorough presentation. We appreciate all your hard work. And it was a pleasure to work with you during the General Assembly session as well. You and Adam were rock stars at helping everyone that had any kind of question about what the authority did to advocating for a piece of legislation. So I appreciate your presence there. I'll turn it over now to Dr. Melton for an update from the Grants Committee. Sarah, take it away.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the board. I'm very happy to give you this update from the Grants Committee. We have been very active since the last meeting of our full board. During this time period, we participated in numerous meetings to include 2 committee meetings, 5 listening sessions, the OAA Grants and Best Practices Workshop that was held in Richmond, and we represented the OAA in individual meetings of our professional associations. In November, the Grants Committee held a publicly noticed meeting to develop the goals, objectives, and timelines for the various OAA grants. And then our staff developed grant guidance for cities and counties that included specific definitions, the terms and conditions, application forms, and a process for how the proposals are going to be reviewed. The committee met again on January 6, 2023 to review those documents and the processes. After discussion, we voted unanimously to approve the documents and processes. And since that time, all of the documents and resources are posted to the OAA's grant portal on the website. So they're there for access for anyone. The initial grant process for the cities and counties opened on January 19th. As part of the launch, OAA conducted a grants workshop and best practices overview on time period of January 19th to 20th in Richmond. Ms. Buckman served as one of the presenters, and more than 200 individuals that represented different cities and counties, as well as other stakeholder organizations, also attended the sessions. And based on the feedback received during the workshop, the staff then developed clarifying language for the definitions of what were direct and indirect costs, and specifically defined what would be considered allowable administrative costs. And then these clarifications were proposed to the committee at our January 30th meeting that was held in Hanover County. After the discussion, the committee voted unanimously to approve those revisions and made them effective on February 1st. Also, during the December 30th meeting, we discussed planning grants for cities and counties. And these grants would be available on a competitive basis to assist our cities and counties to plan for abatement efforts and to support subsequent applications of either individual or collaborative partnership grants. The funding source for these grants would be from the OAA's unrestricted funding. The committee voted unanimously to approve that publication for those grants. And moving forward under new business, there will be a request for the board to adopt the processes approved by the Grants Committee for that time period of January 6th and 30th of this year. And Mr. Chairman, that concludes my report.
Well, thank you, Dr. Melton. Any questions for Sarah from members of the authority? All right. Hearing none, I'm going to turn it over now to Adam for an update from the Finance Committee. Adam?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So as Tony alluded to, there are 2 Finance Committee related items for the board to consider during the new business portion of this evening's agenda. So the first item is related to the OAA's long-term financial strategy. So again, at the January 10, 2023 meeting of the Finance Committee, so staff summarized information that was initially delivered at the December 20th, 2022 meeting so that the committee may consider the information for the quorum present. Of the 2 items presented for consideration, the first included options for the long-term financial strategy for the OAA, consisting of 2 general approaches related to budgeting opioid settlement funds for local, regional, and state discretionary grant awards. Of the 2 methods, staff recommended a measured approach that fully appropriates the OAA individual city county distributions consistent with when settlement funds are received and spreads the appropriations for certain discretionary grant awards over a multi-year period. And this is done to provide more consistent levels of funding on an annual basis. So at the January 10th meeting of the Finance Committee, a motion was made to adopt a measured approach, and then that was unanimously approved. The second item is related to the securitization of OAA settlement funds. So at the January 10th, 2023 meeting, staff provided an overview of securitization, which would include the issuance of bonds that are backed by the opioid settlement revenues, There was a consensus among the members present that staff should explore this option to include seeking the advice and consultation of a third-party financial advisor to examine the costs and benefits of securitization. So again, at that meeting, a motion was made and unanimously approved, directing staff to retain the third-party financial advisor to conduct the analysis and provide information on the securitization of OAA settlement funds. And Mr. Chairman, that concludes the very brief report of the finance committee.
All right, thank you, Adam. Any questions from members of the authority?
Mr. Chairman, it's Tony. If I could just, if I may, I'd like to, for the benefit of anybody that's watching online or who thinks this is recording, just to make sure that some of the thinking here has been explained, is that the measured approach that Adam mentioned and that the finance committee approved would, it recognizes that there's three categories of grants that we give. We give grants directly to individual cities and counties. And those are based on a percentage of the revenue that comes to the opioid abatement authority every year. And so we weren't going to change that. Whatever comes to the opioid abatement authority each year, we turn around and give 15% to the cities and counties. That's the amount that they're entitled to. But then the other two types of grants that we give are, well, first of all, they're competitive. And secondly, they tend to be multi-year grants. So the first of those two is grants to cooperative partnerships or regional grants, and the other is grants or financial assistance to state agencies. And I think what the finance committee's discussion was is that we want to have as close to a steady funding stream as possible for those types of programs. Because if you have a regional, a regional program that's grant funded, you don't want the funding to go up and down every other year. You want some consistency to it. And the same is true for the grants to the state agencies. And so basically what Adam came up with and presented to the committee and that they approved was for us to take the annual revenue that comes to the authority in the form of settlements and smooth it out over the years for the regional grants and for the state agency grants. Now, it's not exactly smooth. It tapers down because at some point these settlements are gonna stop coming. If the authority doesn't find another revenue source, then we'll have to stop funding grants, obviously. And so it's not level forever. It tapers down, but it's more gradual and predictable. And so, Mr. Chairman, I just wanted to take a moment to explain that in case anybody is listening online had any questions about what it was that was discussed.
Thank you, Tony. Does anybody have any questions for Tony or Adam? That clarify?
Just one question. We will be looking into, as part of this, I suspect, investment of those funds. As you smooth, there will be an investment policy and put in place. And that way, instead of it tapering off, we might be able to actually keep it level for longer. Is that anticipated?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Unlike bond funds, you don't have arbitrage or anti-arbitrage situations.
Correct. So, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Spencer, to answer your question, yes, we envision that to be part of we say securitization, but it's really going to be an overall investment strategy, securitization. Yeah. Yes.
Thank you. That's what I anticipated, just want to be clear.
All right. Any other questions? All right. So I guess now, Tony, I can turn it back to you for the new business, or I can take each of those items one by one. How do you want to handle that?
Mr. Chairman, if you don't mind taking them one by one, and I'll be happy to try to answer any additional questions that members of the board might have.
Okay. All right, that sounds great. So the first one on the list is consider to approve and adopt the proposed personnel policy manual that has been presented to us. I'll take a motion for that. Any questions? Okay, have a motion second.
Second.
All right, have a motion a second to approve and adopt the proposed personnel policy manual. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, so that motion carries. The next one, consideration of a new full-time position, business systems analyst with the position not to exceed 140,000 salary and benefits. Any discussion on this matter? All
Mr.
right.
Chairman, at your pleasure, I think throw Adam under the spotlight again. I believe he's got the answer to the question that was posed earlier.
Right, Mr. Watt.
Appropriate.
So Adam, if you want to answer that, if you have any more information, that'd be great.
Yes, sir. So, Mr. Chairman and Mr. Washington, Mr. all the members of the board of directors. So, in looking at the, I guess, starting with FY 24 here, considering that on an annualized basis, it would be about $1.4 million in total for all positions. That does, for planning, that had actually 2 resource coordinators and still has the accounting position contained within it. So that could actually come down. And that would represent about 51% of the total operating budget, the total administrative budget. But again, as Tony pointed out, that total administrative budget would be about 5% of the VOAA budget. So it's a very small amount to consider the kind of everything that's being done for administrative revenue.
Thank you, appreciate the quick comment.
Does that clarify, Mr. Washington?
Excellent job, thank you.
All right, all right. Any other questions concerning this item? All right, well, hearing none, I'll now entertain a motion.
So move.
All right, we have a motion and we have all in favor of approving this new full-time position, say aye. Any opposed? All right, that motion carried. The next item is to consider to provide a signatory authority for the executive director to negotiate a contract for professional service events planning management not to exceed $35,000 for fiscal years 23 and 24 combined. Any questions or comments concerning this?
Move to accept it.
All right, I have a motion. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
All right, I have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, that motion carries. Next is consider to provide signatory authority for the executive director to negotiate a contract for professional services for communications, branding, and marketing not to exceed $15,000 for fiscal year 23 and 24 combined. Any comments or questions concerning this item?
One question, is that based on any kind of research? That's
Yes, sir. We have some quotes in hand.
okay.
So moved.
All right, I have a motion. We have a motion. Do we have a second? We have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye. Any opposed? All right, the next item is board concurrence of grant committee recommendations regarding the grant guidance and processes for the cities and counties. Any discussion on this item? I will now entertain a motion. I have a motion, second.
Second.
Motion is second to approve this item. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. The next item is board concurrence of a measured approach as approved by the finance committee. Does anybody have, Adam, do you want to talk about a little bit about this, or is everybody comfortable with what a measured approach would be? Everybody comfortable? Okay.
I'm happy to answer any questions. I think Tony explained it pretty accurately.
All right, all right. So hearing no comments, do I have a motion?
I'll make a motion.
Motion, do I hear a second?
Second.
I have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye. Any opposed? All right, motion carries. And the last one is consider to provide a signatory authority for the executive director to negotiate a contract with professional services, a financial advisor, in terms of securitization and others, not to exceed $100,000 for fiscal year 23 and 24 combined. Any discussion? Hearing none. Do I have a motion?
So move.
Guys, I have a motion, and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All right, motion, any opposed? All right, that motion carries as well. Any other discussion from the board? Hearing none. Tony, do you have any comments, closing comments that you'd like to share, or?
No, sir, I just want to, if I can take just a point of personal privilege, I'd like to thank the team that works with me in the office every day. These folks have really been doing yeoman's work. You can tell that they're bringing a lot of passion, energy, and drive to the job. I've had some personal challenges with my wife being ill recently, and they have definitely helped me get through that, and have helped keep the office open and keep all of our timelines in check. And so I want to thank them, and certainly, of course, also thank members of the board, particularly those that have traveled to these various meetings over the last few months. I've been bragging on you guys that I don't think there's any other board or commission or authority board in the state that's done as many meetings in the last year as you guys have. And so kudos and thank you for all of your voluntary effort. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Tony. And I'll second your comments on that. That when you all presented to the both the House Appropriations and Senate Finance, they were both teams made comments to me afterward about, one, what a great job you were doing, but also the dedication that the authority seems to have in all these meetings and listening sessions that we're doing throughout the Commonwealth. So I think we're heading in the right direction. Of course, the goal is to make sure that this money gets out into our communities where it belongs. And I know that we're with Dr. Melton's guidance, I know we're getting closer and closer to that goal. So that's certainly exciting. I know that we worked a lot with Secretary Littell and the governor's office during the General Assembly session, which was certainly was great to do. And I know that the First Lady has a lot of emphasis in her efforts and making sure that we move this ball forward and make a true difference in the Commonwealth. So the governor's actually going to be in Southwest Virginia this week. We're doing a presentation at a high school and on One Pill Can Kill and some other things. So I appreciate the administration's commitment to this as well. So hearing no other comments, I appreciate you all traveling there. I apologize, I'm not, but I appreciate you being there and look forward to hearing from Tony after the listening session. So thank you guys. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
All right. All right. Motion second to adjourn. All in favor, say aye. All right. Thank you guys. Have a great evening and keep up the great work.